Hi, this is Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz from Israel 365 News, coming to you live from the Golan. We have an amazing group of people here today. We're Rabbi Tuli Weiss, the head of Israel 365, is with us, along with Josh Wander, who is coming at us live from the Mount of Olives. And we have the amazing guest, Russell Robinson, who runs the JNS, the Jewish National Fund, as we say in Israel, Keren Kayemet L'Yisrael. They've been working for over 120 years to buy and develop land in Israel. That's more than Israel's been around, and they're doing such a good job that Israel is one of the only nations in the world that came into the 21st century with more trees now than we had 100 years ago. So we're bucking the tide here, thanks to the work of Russell and his people. Thanks so much for joining us, Russell.
Thank you very much, Eliyahu. I'm really excited about being here.
Now, Russell, we're excited to have you on because in Israel, at least, it is the month of Shvat. It's the month of Shvat, Rosh Chodesh Shvat today, which means that we all know that is the month of Tu B'Shvat. In just 15 days is the great holiday of Tu B'Shvat, which I think the JNF really put on the map.
Well, I tell people all the time, not only is it our holiday, we sort of take the branding opportunity, but I think for the Jewish people, it's a very special moment that we have to talk about more. Not just Tu B'Shvat because of tree planting, but if you celebrate Earth Day, you're kind of anti-Jewish because we are the originators of Earth Day. We started it with Tu B'Shvat. We are the people that have a new year for our soul and a new year for the earth. And we should be telling our young people every time about how great the Jewish people are, thinking about the earth, the water, the trees, the environment. And that's really the story of Tu B'Shvat, and that is the story of Jewish National Fund.
Yeah. Now, what I love about, Tu B'Shvat is that, especially since we moved to Israel about 10 years ago, we really try every year to go plant trees on Tu B'Shvat. And now, Josh might be on the Mount of Olives, but I'm in my daughter's bedroom right now because we're locked down.
Whoops.
We are locked down. And, Corona is affecting all of our lives. How is the lockdown in Israel impacting the Tu B'Shvat festivities for the JNF?
Well, look, obviously there's a lockdown and we're not going to have people going out like we do in the past, which thousands and thousands of people, as you know, you go and you just drive and there's always a tree planting center somewhere for Tu B'Shvat and to have that experience and just imagine again how cool it is about the Jewish people and about the people in Israel. You're taking your family to go and plant a tree. And that whole act is so special and so meaningful. So I tell people, look, we have online, and we're still going to be planting 3 million trees a year. And the foresters are still working on the forest, and the greening of Israel and taking care of the earth is so important. And I'll tell you a little bit about the United States, but I tell people if you can't go out and do it at your home. Cut a potato up and plant it and show your kids how it grows. Get some seeds and grow. But the act is to make things grow. It's that point in that time of the year in which the ground is starting to heat up and the seeds are starting to take in drops of water and starting to sprout. Go outside and show your kids how even in the cold, you'll see the buds coming up from the trees. That is the miracle of this world in which we live in. And that is the expression that you could still celebrate with Tu B'Shvat today.
But just looking at it from a historical point of view, is this the first Tu B'Shvat that there won't be thousands of people planting trees in Israel?
Yeah. It will be because it's just again the reality, and you got to imagine. And if you even take where trees started, I don't know if the Jewish National Fund, Keren Kayemet L'Yisrael, and tree planting, it came about because you talked about Eliyahu in the introduction about the repurchasing of land. I never say the purchasing of land; it was the repurchasing of land, in which Jews scattered throughout the world collected money in a blue box as a methodology, which became an ideology. Planted trees by buying tree certificates, again, as a methodology of raising money to repurchase the land of Israel for the Jewish people everywhere. And those trees came, we remember 120 years ago, Israel was under Ottoman law. Under Ottoman law, you had to plant or live on your land or lose it in 7 years. And so trees, pine trees and forestation was really a way to hold on to that land. Then there became watershed management and soil erosion and beautification. And then even as immigrants came from 1948 to 1954 and 56, it was an employment opportunity. You could show truckloads of immigrants coming with truckloads of saplings and going up to the mountainside where it was rocky and hilly, and they were planting trees, so they had a dignity of a job to earn a living. So this whole celebration that we're missing this year because of the situation we're in is still a celebration that we should be doing every day.
I remember when I was growing up, the blue and white boxes that you mentioned, it wasn't just, a charity. It was actually an expression of my Jewish identity. I was actively involved in planting trees. And that was such a powerful experience for me. And, okay, God bless you. You're being very upbeat. It's a little bit sad that this powerful aspect of my Jewish identity is being a little darkened this year and is being prevented. It does make me a little sad.
Yeah, look, it makes all of us sad, but if we're going to, we have to take the reality of the situation. Look, I will tell you that this year, Tu B'Shvat across America, which we have every single year. So when you were growing up here, you would have the opportunity. Over 500 schools and congregations are participating this year in Tu B'Shvat across America. Thousands of young kids are learning exactly what you just said. That act of engagement and involvement and planting their roots in the land of Israel, that they'll come and see when they're in high school. We have a high school in Israel, Alexander High School in Israel. They could sign up. They could go there, go to high school in Israel, go to when they're going on their college program, but then go to Israel. They're not to see that exact tree that they did in 4th grade. They'll plant another one that they'll plant with their own hands in the soil, the soul of the Jewish people.
Someone, Eternal Sunny, just wrote that my family bought trees for me and my other siblings when we were born. That's actually an ancient Jewish tradition that I've seen in some communities, that when a child is born, they'll plant a tree. I think there's one tree for a girl. I'm pretty sure it's a cedar of Lebanon for a boy. And I've actually seen that being done. And it is such a Jewish thing. We didn't come back to the land just to live here. We came back here to relate to the land, to watch it flourish.
I think what you're referring to, Elio, is a passage in the Talmud that refers to an ancient custom, which I don't think is done today. But when a child was born, a boy was born, they would plant a tree, and when a girl was born, they would plant a tree. And then when these two got together and decided to get married, they would cut it down. They would intertwine the branches to make the chuppah for them to get married underneath. So it's a beautiful custom. Again, I haven't seen it happen today, but if you're doing that in the Golan, more power to you.
I'll go out and do it now for my kids. It's a little late, but I'm up for it.
But I will tell you, people come online. Look, we sell, over 300,000 a year. Go to Jewish National Fund, jnf.org/trees. Plant a tree for Tu B'Shvat. Plant a tree for a newborn. Plant a tree for somebody's wedding. Plant a tree, sadly in memory of, but have it grow. I will tell you my own personal story. I have a tree certificate here from my father. My father, in 1939, a tree certificate was planted for his bar mitzvah in Canada. That's before the state of Israel. 1939. And I will tell you, I never knew he had it, except when he passed away, it was in the bottom of his drawer, a certificate from his 13 years old that he had held on till he died when he was 85. So I don't know why. I don't have to know why. I know that there must be a big, meaningful reason. And that's why go do it. Keep that tree certificate. Plant it for a newborn. Plant it for a bar mitzvah. Plant it for a wedding in memory of. That tree certificate is a meaningful connection to the land and to the people of Israel.
Can you repeat that URL once again, please?
Go to jnf.org/trees, jnf.org/trees, or you can call 1-800-542-8733, and we'll order it now and make sure the certificate gets delivered before.
You're so right. I remember, getting tree certificates as well both for my bar mitzvah and on, milestones. And it really is a very Jewish thing. It's a very special thing and it's something that, sticks with you no matter what. You remember that. And so something that you said though, Russell, is really fascinating. You said that 3 million trees a year. Did I hear that right?
You plant about 3 million. Karen Kayemet plants about 3 million because you're replanting. So I'm not going to get into the whole forestation. Forests don't just, first off, of course, you have forest fires and you have that, but you have urban forests and you're replanting a lot of trees because you have death in trees and you got to keep a forest healthy. So you're not adding forest areas. There's only some certain amounts of land, but you have to constantly replant to keep your forests going. And remember, we have forests that are in the desert. By the way, if you go down, you got Tyr Forest down in the Negev, and you see that beautiful line of green that goes, that the U.S. Forest Service comes to study how Israel does desert forest planting and growing. And, so it's an amazing thing. When Ilan Ramon was up in the, unfortunately, and passed, but before, he looked out of the window and he showed everybody that you could see the border of the state of Israel based upon it was green. That green was because Eliyahu and everybody else were planting trees as kids, and we were planting trees then in Israel. And you could see it all the way from outer space.
Now, how many are you planting new forests? Is it just replanting?
It's a lot of replanting because you got a developing country here in Israel. I think the latest census shows you almost 10 million people. And by the way, it's one of the forestation issues that we have is that our forests are almost 100% urban forests, meaning that, and I use Montana, you can have a forest fire in Montana, and if it took over thousands of acres, it would burn down one house. In Israel, all forests are urbanized forests. So, you have an issue of forest fire and forest fire prevention. And so that is a lot of the cost as well. But you're always doing reforestation. By the way, at KKL, they're doing a lot of study to make sure that the forests that they're planting are indigenous species. Now, some people always complain the pines weren't indigenous. And I explained it when we were planting those forests back 120 years ago, it was the Eastern Europeans were bringing pine trees from the Black Forests of Europe, not to have a forest, but to hold on to the land. And today they're planting oaks that date, the oak that goes back from the time of the Bible. They do DNA from even apple orchards and so on that again date back from the time of the Mishnah. And so we're always trying to make sure that we're doing things right as we move forward, but we're also taking care of what we have.
We actually have on my mountain, on the Mount of Olives, a number of olive trees which date back 2,000 years. I think they're of the oldest fruit-bearing trees in the world today, that they're still bearing fruit in Gethsemane. I was curious to know, how do you decide what species of trees to plant?
So there's a very sophisticated research and development center at the Karen Kayemet that talk about what is the best species for the area. If you have an olive grove, you try to replant, as you know, with olive groves because of not necessarily their life expectancy, as you talk about when they're healthy, but they don't have a big root system, so they do get wiped out in a lot of different ways. So you try to replant in areas. What do you have? You can't take a pine forest, for instance, and sometimes people say, well, you're still planting pine trees, because if you're in a pine forest, you got to keep planting a certain amount of pines. You can't just all of a sudden decide today we're going to plant oaks. But if you're driving from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, or Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, you'll see some of the trees that are growing there are oaks. Now, they're Middle Eastern oaks, which are indigenous species. Now, to tell you how nobody's ever happy, oaks take, 30, 40 years to even get to the point of maturity. A pine tree takes about, 5 years. And so people start complaining that the oak trees are taking too long. So, but
are policy changed since the forest fires to try to plant trees that are less susceptible to fires?
Absolutely. Look, that's something you always learn. Pine trees, for instance, are like a matchbox. That sap that comes out of a pine tree. If you go camping, if you took that sap and put it on wood, it would give you ignite your campfire very well. But it also ignites a forest fire very well. So you have breaks, and you have the kinds of species that you plant that are going to slow down fires. So constantly learning. Again, it's a country still under, a nation. I always call it a nation still under creation. So we're always going to learn, grow, and do things right tomorrow.
Well, you must be doing something right, because we just finished the summer. Now it's the rainy season. It's actually raining here. You could hear it on the window, thank God. And until it starts raining in Israel, there's a big danger of forest fires. And usually every summer, or even into the fall, where it's very dry, and before it starts raining and it's windy, those are very dangerous conditions in Israel. And there's often forest fires. And I live in the Beit Shemesh area, where it's very green, and it's always a danger. This year, thank God, there was maybe one or two relatively minor incidents. But is that because the JNF is actively preventing fires, and then we just don't hear about it?
No, 100%. It's right. First off, the KKL works very hard. You had terrible, devastating forest fires years past. You're able to plant different kinds, as was talked about by Josh, different kinds of trees that help break that. You have to have forest fire management that's constantly going on. You're hoping to catch it before it gets into a terrible situation. So you may have smaller fires. I think that there has been more education from people understanding. And I'll tell you, the COVID and quarantine caused a lot of people not to be out as well. So I think you have a lot. Water management is something that we were very much involved in as well. Israel always faces droughts, but it's not just Israel, it's the Middle East. And, if you look at Israel, we have the same drop of water. The drop of water that comes from the sky doesn't know the border of Israel. It comes down. And if you look at the hilltops bring the water, and it comes into the Mediterranean. 20 years ago, they estimated that by the year 2020, Israel would be out of water. You could Google this and see that Israel faced a water.
Well, we desalinate an enormous amount of our drinking water today.
So you desalinate an enormous amount of water today. In 20 years, you desalinated zero. And today, Israel reuses, listen to what I'm saying, 90% of its wastewater. 90. The country next to Israel is Spain at 25%. Israel takes a drop of water and reuses it and reuses it and reuses it. And that precious commodity, life, water, mayim, is something that the Jewish National Fund has been involved in with our 250 reservoirs, our recycling centers, which allows you to drink desalinated water, but the farmers and the public lands to be able to utilize recycled water. By the way, which is part of why we do it too, is to populate places like the Negev, 60% of the land of Israel. We've been working to move 500,000 people to the Negev. When we started, only 7%. Today, it's 12% of the population of Israel. And in the Galil, to move 300,000 people to the Galil. So all that happens if you have water management, forestation, beautification, environment, and you work with us to make sure that we're taking and changing narratives in places like Beersheba or Kiryat Shimona.
What about across the borders of Judea and Samaria? I'm curious to know in general what the policy of JNF is, and whether those policies have changed because of either American or Israeli administrations.
No, listen, the Jewish National Fund USA has had a priority for the past 19 years of working in the Negev and Galil. we understood that there was nobody else working in those areas. Nobody else focused on that. Beersheba, 18 years ago, was losing 3% population per year. Beersheba. It was the capital of the Negev, yet it was 193,000 people losing population. Today, Beersheba is 247,000 people, the fastest growing city in Israel. Jewish National Fund, 7 miles of riverwalk, a 29-acre lake that we just opened 3 months ago, a 13,000-seat amphitheater, redoing of the old city, the Lauder Employment Center, and we're starting to build and plan now the largest venture ever in the Jewish world, on 19 acres of land, an international Zionist village for high school, for college, and for adults to come together to learn about the history of Israel, today Israel, all about 500 yards away from Abraham's well, where the conversation first began.
So the JNF doesn't discriminate across the Green Line, what is called the Green Line.
No, we prioritize our work in the Galilee and in the Negev. That's where we're putting 98% of our efforts into it. And you know, we can't do everything well, so we do everything that we do well.
Can we go back to something you said a minute ago that was also very interesting to me? Because I remember hearing that Israel planted, I think, 240 million trees, right, in 100 years.
270 million.
Okay, so I must have heard about it a few years ago, and I was like wondering, how is that possible? So I guess, like you said, some of it is replanting. Do you distinguish between those two? Is there because every time I drive around Beit Shemesh, where again you mentioned the people who you employed and who you provided work for, and there's a lot of towns near the Beit Shemesh area which were established by Kurdistan or Moroccan immigrants when they came in the early 50s, and they weren't, they didn't have skills necessarily that were compatible for the economy at the time, and they worked for the Kakal and they planted trees. That's what they did. And I heard some of them telling me that they would I think collect stones, and at the end of the day they would show them how many, every time they would plant a tree they would put a stone in their pocket or something like that, and then they would go to the foreman at the end and they would give them 150 stones, and they would get their 150 lira or something. They were very proud of that fact that they would plant hundreds of trees every day in this area, in the area, really Beit Shemesh area between here and Jerusalem. Those are all planted by hand, all planted by Kakal and the JNF. Are there numbers? Do you know how many were planted by hand versus the replanting that you mentioned? Because to me, it's fascinating.
So the majority of them were all those hand-planted forests, the arterial forests, as I said, in the Negev. If you go all the way into the north, as you're talking there, think about the dignity that was given. These are people, Israel's population doubled between 1952 and 1956. And it doubled with a population, you're right, that didn't come with the kind of skill sets and the knowledge. They were coming from Arab and North African countries coming to Israel. They were settled in places, as you would say, Beit Shemesh, but back then Beit Shemesh was a far drive away from anywhere, and Yorachams and Damonas and Kiryat Shimonas, because we had to have populations there to be able to protect the land. And right. So you could either do welfare or you do workfare. So to give dignity as well, these people, as I said, truckloads of saplings to be sent up to rocky areas of land that you would say, who's going to plant a tree there? But it was part of a job opportunity as well. And they would plant a tree and collect a stone, plant a tree and come back, and they'd show there was no trees there. And I planted 100. And that's how you got your paycheck. So for these people, it became a livelihood. But I'll tell you that you could hear exactly what you said, Tuli, that the pride that they had, it wasn't just about doing that. It's when I will tell you, when I came, when there was a big Carmel forest fire, and there was foresters, and you got to understand, to attack a forest fire, to tell you, and this is not Russell and knowledgeable, I learned. When you're going into a house fire, you attack the fire. In a forest fire, you have to surround it. and you have to try to contain it. So it's a whole different skill set. And I was watching foresters who were there literally risking their life during this Carmel fire. And one of them, there was an exhausted group of these KKL forest fire people. And I went to them and I could see that there was tears in their eyes. And I said, guys, you did a great job. They said, yeah, but those trees were planted by somebody's grandfather. Then their kid saw that tree growing, and their grandchild saw that tree growing, and now I saw the end of that tree. And I'm determined that we're going to replant and grow so somebody else's great-grandchild can see it. When you see that pride with soot on their face, you say, you know what? Something's great about our nation.
There is an amazing statement in the Talmud. Rabbi Abba taught in Sanhedrin that there is no greater sign of redemption than the agricultural reblooming of the land of Israel. And we are actually watching it today as the land, if you look at what was written by Mark Twain a century ago, when everything was barren and there was just desert everywhere. And today the land has is becoming not only in trees, but in human beings, in every sort of industry. We are leading the pack in the world, and we are so proud of that, and we are so happy to be living in such a special time. I thank you so much for coming on, Mr. Robinson, because this has been very educational for everybody. Elio, would you like to conclude, or Tuli?
Just want to thank you, Russell, again. And, Josh, you quoted a very beautiful verse. To me, one of the most powerful Bible verses about tree planting is what it says in the prophet Amos, that I will plant them upon their soil, never to be uprooted from the soil I have given them, said Hashem, your God. And the idea that, God is planting the Jewish people in the land, and the tree is really, a metaphor for life, but especially when it comes to the replanting of the people of Israel in the land of Israel. And really, thanks to the JNF, thanks to Russell. I know it's great to have you here. We appreciate your time, and thank you. Shalom, and Chodesh Tov. Happy month of Shvat.
Thank you. And again, go on jnf.org/tree and order a tree.